The sun rose slowly over New Delhi, casting golden light through the wide glass windows of the International Convention Center. It was the day of the Global Innovation and Education Summit, an event that gathered world leaders, scientists, teachers, and changemakers from all across India and beyond. Hundreds of chairs filled the grand hall. Lights were focused on the wide stage where banners fluttered gently with messages of progress, unity, and vision for the future. Lakshmi Pichai adjusted her cotton sari and sat quietly in the last row. She wasn't a speaker. She wasn't even part of the main guest list. She had come only as a guest of her son, Sundar, the same Sundar Pichai, who now led one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. He was scheduled to speak later in the afternoon. Lakshmi had never stepped into a hall like this before. She usually stayed home in Chennai, far from the spotlight. She was proud, of course. Every mother would be. But more than that, she was tired. Tired from the long flight. Tired from the years of sacrifice. Her husband had passed away when she was only 10. Since then, she had stitched clothes for neighbors, taken evening classes to help children with maths, and quietly built a life so her son could study without worrying about anything else. Now she was here, in this shining hall. Unknown, unnoticed, just another woman in the background, a few rows ahead. Journalists whispered and checked their cameras. Officials in suits glanced at their notes. A buzz went through the crowd as the MC stepped up. Ladies and gentlemen, he began with a broad smile. We are honored to begin today's session with none other than the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. The room stood, cameras flashed, applause echoed. Lakshmi stood too, politely folding her hands. Her eyes stayed low. Modi walked to the podium, calm and confident. His eyes scanned the crowd, not just the front row, but beyond, all the way to the back. He began to speak. Today, he said, we celebrate minds that change the world. We honor technology, education, and leadership. But let us not forget the hands that shaped those minds. Lakshmi shifted slightly, unsure where this was going. Modi continued. Many of you know Sundar Pichai. You see him on international stages. You read his words. But do you know who taught him patience? Who taught him dignity? Who taught him how to hold a broken radio in his hands and ask, how does this work? There was a pause. The room leaned in. That teacher, Modi said, turning slightly, is sitting among us. She is not on the list of speakers. She is not on the cover of any magazine. But she is the foundation of Sundar's story. Lakshmi blinked. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her sari. Her name hadn't been called, but her story had. Lakshmi Pichai, Modi said clearly, please rise. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. But people turned, heads turned, cameras turned. Even Sundar, sitting with other guests of honor, stood up in shock. Lakshmi stood slowly. The world felt distant. The room burst into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunderous, respectful. People clapped not for a title or a position, but for the silent years, the early mornings, the quiet strength of a mother. Modi stepped down from the podium. He walked through the rows, straight to her. Security made way, but Lakshmi just stood. Frozen. Then he folded his hands in front of her. You remind us, he said, that the future begins at home, often in silence, and always with sacrifice. Tears welled up in her eyes, not because of the cameras, not because of the spotlight, but because, for the first time, someone had seen her, seen her behind her. Someone whispered, who is she? Another voice replied, she is the reason he became Sundar Pichai. The moment lasted only a minute, but something deep shifted in the room. It wasn't a political moment. It was a human one. Later, when Sundar gave his speech, his voice cracked in the middle. You saw my mother today, he said softly. Now you know why I am who I am. And Lakshmi. She sat back down. Her hands still trembled. She didn't smile for the cameras, but she closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered something only she could hear. Your father would have been proud. Outside, the sky blazed a little brighter, and inside that quiet corner of the hall, a woman who once stitched clothes in the dark now stitched her name into history with nothing but silence, grace, and a heart full of love. The next morning, Lakshmi Pichai woke before sunrise, just like she had for decades. But this morning felt different. Something had shifted. The hotel room was quiet, yet her heart felt louder than usual. Not in a nervous way but full, as if a hidden door inside her had opened. Sundar had knocked on her room door late the previous night. He didn't say much, just hugged her tightly, longer than usual. No words, just the sound of his heartbeat against hers. It reminded her of the nights when he was a boy, frightened by thunder, and would crawl into her bed. That same boy now ran one of the world's biggest companies, but to her, he would always be the boy with big eyes and a bigger heart. By 7 a.m., her phone had already begun to ring. Old neighbors from Chennai, relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. Even students from her tutoring days. Some had seen it live. Others watched the clip online. They all said the same thing. You made us proud. You deserve it. We never knew. Lakshmi only smiled gently and replied, I just did what every mother would. But in her heart, she knew not every mother had the strength to stay invisible for so long. Around 9 a.m., a woman knocked on her door. She wore a black blazer and had a badge on her coat that read, Summit Guest Coordinator. Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai, she asked politely. The organizing committee would like to invite you to the roundtable breakfast with the Prime Minister. It's informal, small gathering. We understand if you wish to decline. Lakshmi blinked. Me. The woman smiled. Yes, ma'am. Your presence yesterday moved a lot of hearts. The Prime Minister specifically asked that you join. Lakshmi hesitated. She wasn't used to formal meals, let alone ones with prime ministers. But something in her said, go. Not for yourself. Not for attention. But because it might matter. She nodded softly. At 10 a.m., she sat at a long table in a private lounge with 9 other guests. Among them were respected scientists, global educators, social activists, and yes, Narendra Modi himself. He greeted everyone warmly. When his eyes met Lakshmi's, he smiled with respect. I'm glad you came, he said. She gave a small nod and pressed her palms together as people discussed new policies and global visions. Lakshmi mostly listened. Her English was fine, but not perfect. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Every once in a while, someone at the table would glance her way, not out of pity or curiosity, but as if to say, you belong here too. At one point, someone asked her, Mrs. Pichai, may we ask, what was the hardest part of raising Sundar? The table quieted. Lakshmi looked down at her tea, then looked up. Not having enough, she said simply. Not enough money, not enough light. Sometimes, not even enough rice. But I always had enough hope, enough reason to believe he would be more than me. A silence followed, then a round of gentle nods. Even Modi seemed to reflect deeply. You speak like a philosopher, he said kindly. Lakshmi gave a soft laugh. No, sir, just a mother. After breakfast, as the guests stood to leave, Modi approached her personally. You said yesterday that your husband would have been proud, he said. She nodded. I think, Modi said, millions of fathers and mothers across India saw themselves in you yesterday. And today, they are proud too. Lakshmi's eyes moistened, but she kept her composure. Thank you, sir, she said. But if it helps even one girl believe that her story matters, ... then I am grateful. They shook hands, Modi's with his trademark firmness, hers with quiet strength. As Lakshmi stepped out of the building, a cool breeze touched her face. Not many people noticed her now. There were no cameras, no microphones, no spotlights, but that was fine, because her work wasn't done. Back in her room, she opened her small diary, the one she carried everywhere. Inside, there were simple notes, reminders, and a list she had kept for years. A list of names. They were girls from her neighborhood, some still studying, some had dropped out, some were forced into early marriages. She had once tried to help them. A few, she tutored quietly in the evenings. Others, she encouraged to stay in school, but now, she had something more powerful. Her voice, her story, her moment, and she wasn't going to let it fade. That evening she called Sundar. "Beta," she said softly, "I want to stay in Delhi for a few more days." "Of course," Sundar replied. "Everything okay?" Lakshmi hesitated, then smiled. "Yes," she said, "but there are some girls here I need to meet. They don't know me yet, but I think they need to." She hung up. Outside, the city lights flickered on. Inside her, something brighter had already begun to shine. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one. 3 days had passed since Lakshmi Pichai stood in the spotlight. The applause had faded, but something inside her had changed permanently. She still wore her simple saris. She still packed her bag with biscuits and water bottles before heading out. But her steps had a new strength. Her heart, a new mission. On the 4th morning, she visited a small school on the edge of South Delhi. It wasn't on any official tour. No one invited her. She had read about it online the night before, while scrolling quietly through news on her phone. The article had said the school faced frequent power cuts. Many girls dropped out by class 7. Some never came back after the pandemic. Lakshmi arrived unannounced. The principal, a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes, looked surprised. "Ma'am," she said gently, "we weren't expecting anyone." "I'm not anyone," Lakshmi said with a warm smile. "Just a mother who used to teach maths." The principal led her through narrow halls, chipped paint on the walls, children in worn uniforms, teachers doing their best. With little Dot in a corner classroom, Lakshmi met 30 girls, seated cross-legged on the floor. They looked up at her, wide-eyed and curious. She didn't give a long speech. She just sat down among them. "Tell me your names," she said, and they did. One by one, shy at first, then braver. Each name rolled through the air like soft wind. Pooja Maina, Ananya, Fatima Priya. "Now," she said softly, "tell me what you want to become." "Some," said teacher. "Some doctor." One said police officer. A few giggled and said actress. One girl, barely 10, whispered astronaut. Lakshmi's eyes twinkled. "Do you know," she said, "that I raised a boy who once couldn't afford a phone. He became the man who helped build the phones you hold today." They listened, silent now. "He sat on the floor like you," she added. "He studied under a flickering bulb, and he never forgot the lessons he learned at home." One girl asked, "How did he do it?" Lakshmi paused. "He listened," she said. "He worked hard. And most of all, he believed that small beginnings can lead to big dreams." That night, back in her hotel, Lakshmi's phone rang again. "Amma," Sundar said, "are you all right? I saw a clip online. People are talking about your school visit." "I'm fine, Beta," she replied. "But something is not fine." "What do you mean?" Lakshmi leaned back and looked at the city lights through the window. "These girls," she said, "they don't need speeches. They need paths. They need to know someone is walking beside them, not just ahead of them." Sundar was quiet. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Lakshmi was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I want to start a fund, something small, for girls who can't afford uniforms, or notebooks, or bus fares. I don't want a name on it. I just want it to reach quietly like how I lived." Sundar smiled on the other side. "Then I'll help," he said. "No," she replied gently. "You've already done enough. Let me do something now." For once, Let me be the one leading. He laughed softly. Amma, you've always been the one leading. I'm just catching up. The next morning, Lakshmi met with a local NGO. She brought a small black notebook with handwritten notes. No laptop, no presentation. Just vision. I don't want this to be about me, she told them. I want this to be about the invisible ones. The NGO agreed to help manage the funds. Within 48 hours, volunteers were distributing sanitary pads and new books to the same school she visited. No speeches, no press, just action, but news travels fast when it touches hearts. A small blog picked up the story. Then a journalist tweeted about it. Soon, Lakshmi's name began to trend again, because of who her son was, but because of who she was becoming. An anchor called her for an interview. She politely refused. My work doesn't need cameras, she said. It needs hands. But one morning, as she walked past a tea stall near Connaught Place, something unusual happened. A teenage girl ran up to her, breathless. Are you Lakshmi, ma'am? Lakshmi turned, surprised. Yes, she replied. The girl fumbled in her pocket and held out a small notebook. I saw your video, she said. I wrote a speech about you for my school competition. We were asked to talk about a woman we admire. I picked you. Lakshmi looked at the girl's eyes, bright, nervous, honest. What's your name? She asked. Kavya, the girl said. Lakshmi reached out and gently placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. Then, Kavya, she said, you have already done something brave. You saw a story that was quiet and chose to speak it. Kavya smiled and ran back to join her mother. Lakshmi stood still for a moment, and then, for the first time in days, she allowed herself to cry, not out of sadness, but because she realized something. Sometimes, when life finally hears your whisper, it echoes in places you never expected, and this time, it was echoing in the hearts of girls across India. By the end of the week, Lakshmi Pichai had quietly visited 5 different schools across Delhi. She never arrived with a camera crew or security. She carried a cloth bag with a steel tiffin, a notebook, and sometimes extra pens to hand out. The children began to recognize her, not as a celebrity's mother, but as Amma, who listens. Every day, she heard stories of girls who walked 6 kilometers just to attend school. Stories of young daughters working part-time jobs to support their mothers. Stories of shame, of strength, of hope buried beneath broken benches and torn textbooks. Each story left a mark on her heart, like raindrops carving paths into dry soil. Meanwhile, Sundar had returned to the United States for meetings, but not before setting up a small trust fund at her request. He named it quietly, Uma's Path. Lakshmi had told him not to use her name, but he insisted this one time. It's not just for you, he said. It's for every Amma out there. The trust began helping schools purchase fans, lights, and books. Still, Lakshmi made sure none of it felt like charity. She met with every principal. She asked them one question. What do your girls dream of that they haven't dared to say out loud? One principal said the girls wanted a library. Another said they needed sanitary kits. One teacher said, they just want someone to believe they matter. Lakshmi took note of everything, but just when things seemed to settle into rhythm, something unexpected happened. Late one evening, a call came from the office of the President of India. Lakshmi almost didn't answer. She thought it might be another reporter, but when the calm voice said, "Ma'am, the President would like to meet you," she sat down slowly. "Me?" she asked again. "Yes," the aide replied. "Your work has been noted," quietly, but powerfully. Next morning, dressed in her usual soft-colored sari, she arrived at Rashtrapati Bhavan. The guards greeted her respectfully. She was guided through grand halls and marble corridors, but her steps were steady. When the president greeted her, he offered his hand and said, "Thank you for reminding this country what silent strength looks like." They spoke over tea for nearly an hour. Lakshmi spoke simply. Honestly, sir, she said, we keep building smart cities, smart tech, smart futures. But are we raising smart hearts? Strong hearts? The president listened quietly. What do you need to continue your work? He asked. Lakshmi smiled. I don't need attention. I need bridges between power and people, between law and love. Before leaving, she handed over a letter. It wasn't a request for money or award. It was a list of 10 small schools across India that she had visited or was planning to visit. She had written down each school's challenges, not just statistics, but emotions. Like this one feels forgotten, or the headmistress hasn't taken a day off in 6 years. I am just the voice, she said. You are the echo. That evening, a short official note was released. It said the president had met with grassroots education advocate Lakshmi Pichai to discuss inclusion, equity, and sustainable reform in school support. No photos were released. No press conference was held, but those who needed to see it saw it. The next few days, Lakshmi received calls from small school leaders across states. They thanked her for giving them visibility without noise. One message came from a school in Bihar. We don't have enough desks, but today we felt seen. Another came from Meghalaya. Your story reached us, so we gathered all the girls and read it aloud. But even as her influence quietly grew, Lakshmi faced criticism too. One article asked, is she just another political story dressed in emotion? Another questioned her experience. No official training, just the mother of a tech CEO. Lakshmi didn't respond publicly, but one evening, at a modest school event, a young reporter caught up with her and asked bluntly, do you think you're qualified to lead this kind of movement? Lakshmi looked at the girl kindly. Beta, she said, I am not leading, I'm walking with them. And if walking with them is wrong, then maybe the path itself needs changing. The reporter paused, then slowly nodded. That moment went viral. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Back at the hotel, Lakshmi looked through her old diary again, the one where she had written the names of girls from Chennai years ago. She turned to a new page and started a new list. This time not names, but dreams. Make a bus route for rural girls. Fund training for women teachers. Give each girl a mirror not for beauty, but so she sees someone worth believing in. The page filled slowly, not with plans, with promises. And before going to bed, she whispered softly, as if to herself, this isn't about one mother anymore. It's about all of us. The rain came gently that morning in Delhi. Soft, steady drops kissed the windows of Lakshmi Pichai's small guest room near the education ministry. She sat by the window with a warm cup of tea, watching the world blur slightly behind the raindrops. In her lap rested another notebook, her third since arriving. The first two were already full of school visits, names, needs, and silent wishes she had collected from girls across India. She had now been in Delhi for nearly 3 weeks. What began as a visit to watch her son speak had turned into something much greater, something deeper. Not a journey of fame, but of purpose. But something troubled her that morning. A girl named Mersh was only 13. Lakshmi had met her 3 days ago at a community shelter school near Yamuna Bazaar. She was bright, sharper than most adults Lakshmi had met. Mehor had dreams of becoming a civil engineer, but her home had collapsed in last year's floods. Her father had vanished, and her mother now worked cleaning hotel bathrooms. Mehor walked 2 hours a day to reach the shelter school. When Lakshmi asked her, what do you need most? Mehor had simply replied, just a safe roof and a table to write on. Lakshmi hadn't been able to forget her face. That afternoon, she returned to the school with a local volunteer. The school had thin tin sheets for walls, and rainwater leaked through a hole in the ceiling. Children were wiping benches with their sleeves. Still, they smiled. Still, they learned. Lakshmi pulled the head teacher aside. How much does it cost, she asked softly, to fix this roof? The head teacher hesitated. Ma'am, we've tried. Applications, requests, ... No one listens. Lakshmi said nothing. She took out her phone. She dialed a number from her book. This is Lakshmi Pichai, she said. I'm calling about a roof. By evening, a contractor had agreed to send a team. Lakshmi paid from her own account. No waiting, no ceremony, just action. 2 days later, the roof was fixed. Mehor sat at her desk again, dry, safe, and smiling. When Lakshmi visited the next time, Mehor ran to her and hugged her tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Lakshmi knelt down, held her face gently, and said, No, Mehor, thank you. You reminded me that no dream is small, and no heart should be wet while learning. Word of the roof story spread quietly through teacher networks and local media. Still, Lakshmi refused interviews. She always told them, talk to the children, not to me. But change cannot hide forever. One evening, while reviewing documents with a retired educator she had befriended, she received a message. It was from the office of the Prime Minister again. This time, it wasn't an invitation. It was a request. Modi's personal secretary had written, Sir is planning a national address on girl-child education next week. He would be honored if you agreed to speak for 5 minutes during the event. Lakshmi stared at the message. She didn't like stages. She didn't like crowds. But she remembered Meher's voice. Just a roof and a table to write on. She replied, I will come, but I will speak only if girls are present. The reply came within an hour. They will be. The next week, the national address was broadcast from a large open-air hall in Delhi, filled with teachers, students, and activists. Lakshmi walked to the stage in her modest sari. The same cloth bag hung on her shoulder. When her name was called, the applause was loud, but she didn't wave. She simply walked to the mic and looked out at the crowd. Then she began. Her voice calm, but full of weight. Namaste, she said. I am not a leader, not a scholar. I am just a mother. The crowd listened. I did not raise my son to be famous. I raised him to be kind, to be curious, to believe that every question matters even when asked in a small room with a leaky roof. People leaned in closer. When I travel now and meet young girls, they do not ask for riches. They ask for safety, for light to study, for someone to believe they matter. She paused. A country does not grow because of tall buildings. It grows because of tall dreams. A girl in the crowd stood silently, tears in her eyes. It was Meher. Lakshmi continued. Let us build more than roads. Let us build confidence in our daughters. Not through big words, but through small acts, repeated daily. Then, she stepped back. No slogans, no drama, just truth. Modi rose from his seat and nodded respectfully. The speech lasted barely 5 minutes, but by nightfall, it was shared across every platform in India. Teachers messaged each other, parents wept quietly, and girls stood taller. Lakshmi returned to her room that night and sat in silence. She didn't turn on the news. She didn't open social media. Instead, she opened her notebook. On the last page, she wrote, If even one girl sits safely under a dry roof tomorrow, then all this was worth it. The weeks passed quietly. Lakshmi Pichai stayed longer in Delhi than anyone had expected. Devon herself. She was no longer just a mother who had come to support her son. She had become something more. Not a celebrity, not a politician, but a quiet force that moved like water, soft, patient, and unstoppable. Her notebook was now full. She had met over 200 girls from 7 states. She had helped repair roofs, deliver books, fund school shoes, and most importantly listen. But she knew it was time to go home. On her last day in Delhi, she visited the very first school she had gone to after her recognition. The same classroom with girls, sitting cross-legged on the floor. the same cracked walls. But something had changed. There were new windows now, brighter paint, a shelf with new books, and more girls than before. When she entered, they all stood and clapped. A small banner hung over the blackboard. It read, "Thank you, Amma Lakshmi." She smiled softly, her eyes misty. "Sit down, Batian," she said. "I came today not to teach, but to thank you." They looked at her, curious. She knelt down and placed her hand on the floor. "This ground," she said, "is where change begins. Not in big buildings, not in offices, but here, with all of you." A girl asked Uma, "Will you come back?" Lakshmi held her gaze and replied, "I never left. I will be with you, in every mirror you look into. Stand proud, speak gently, and never think you are less." After lunch, she packed her bags slowly in the guest house. Her phone buzzed again, as it had done every day since the Prime Minister had honored her this time. The message was different, a personal message from Narendra Modi himself. "Dear Lakshmi ji," it read, "thank you for reminding us that greatness often walks in silence. Your work has awakened something deep in our nation. When we speak of reform, we now speak of you. When we dream of daughters rising, we think of your journey. You have written history not with power, but with love." She read the message twice, then replied simply, "Thank you, sir. May every daughter rise higher than we ever dared to dream." At the airport the next day, Sundar met her at the gate. He was emotional, tired from travel, but glowing with quiet pride. Double quotes, AMMA, he said, "I can't describe what you've done." She smiled. "Then don't describe it," she said. "Just keep doing your part." On the flight home to Chennai, Lakshmi looked out the window. Below her, the land of India stretched wide and endless, full of rivers, mountains, villages, and dreams. She closed her eyes and saw their faces. Meher, Kafia Pooja, the girl who wanted to be an astronaut, the girl who wanted only a table to write on. She remembered each one. When she landed, a small group of girls from her neighborhood waited for her with flowers. They had seen her speech, they had read her story, and now they had dreams of their own. Lakshmi hugged each one gently. Then, she walked home through the narrow lane she had known all her life. The walls were the same, the air was the same, but the world had changed, and in a small room with a flickering bulb, the same bulb that once lit Sundar's study table. She sat down at her old sewing machine, not to stitch clothes this time, but to stitch the final line of her legacy. A legacy written not in gold, but in notebooks, raindrops, and daughters who would no longer be invisible. As the night fell gently over Chennai, a mother rested, not because her work was done, but because it had just begun. Months had passed since Lakshmi Pichai returned to Chennai. The rains had come and gone. The newspapers had found new headlines. The cameras had turned to other faces. But in the narrow lanes of her old neighborhood, something still glowed. Change had taken root. Lakshmi had resumed her quiet life. She cooked her own meals. She still walked to the local temple each morning. She still helped neighbor children with homework when they knocked on her door. But now, a steady stream of letters arrived at her doorstep. Not fan mail, not just handwritten notes from girls and women across the country. "I passed my exam because of you. My school now has clean water. I didn't give up, because I saw someone like you speak." Lakshmi read each one, carefully, slowly. Sometimes, she wrote back. Sometimes, she simply folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box, marked Daughters. Meanwhile, the trust she had inspired Uma's path had grown, quietly, without marketing, without banners, and without her name in the spotlight. Teachers and grassroots workers across villages now used the fund to repair benches, start libraries, buy bicycles for girls who lived far from school. In one tribal district, girls had formed a debate group and named it Lakshmi Voices. In another rural area, a school painted a quote on its wall that read, "Your story matters, even if no one is watching." Lakshmi never asked for updates. She believed true work should live beyond the worker. But something was coming that she hadn't expected. One evening, Sundar called her from the US. He said softly, "You've been nominated." Lakshmi frowned. For what? For the Padma Shri. She sat quietly. "I didn't ask for this," she said. "I know," Sundar replied. "But the country is asking to honor you." Lakshmi didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "If it brings more light to these girls, I will accept. But only if I can wear my cotton sari and sit with the students." The ceremony was held on a clear spring morning in New Delhi. The President of India stood on the grand stage. Sundar was there, sitting humbly in the audience. So were teachers, girls from across the nation, and quiet women who had never seen a flight, but now saw hope when Lakshmi's name was called. The hall stood in applause. She walked slowly to the stage. Her steps were gentle, but her presence filled the room. She bowed, accepted the medal, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing the invisible." After the ceremony, a little girl approached. "Her Oma ji," she said, holding up a sketchbook. "I drew you." Lakshmi took the paper. It was a drawing of a woman in a simple sari, standing under a leaking roof, holding up an umbrella not over herself, but over a group of small girls reading books. Lakshmi's throat tightened. "This is me?" she asked. The girl nodded. I looked at her and said, "This is you. Every time you protect someone smaller than you, you become me." That night, she returned to her room, the medal placed gently in a box. She sat on her bed and opened her old diary one last time. She wrote, "They once said my work was invisible. Now, I know. Invisible does not mean unimportant. It means the roots are growing underground." And with that, she closed the book. In the days that followed, she continued to visit schools, quietly and without notice. But her story had already done its work. It had reached places even she would never visit. Not through speeches, not through awards, but through a feeling passed from one girl to another that someone like me made it. So maybe I can too. And in the quiet corners of India, where chalk dust rises and dreams are whispered instead of shouted, Lakshmi Pichai's story lived on, not as a headline, but as a seed.